I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Do you know the saying, loose lips sink ships? Of one thing there can be no doubt in the Morphew case. Barry did an awful lot of talking before he hired his defense lawyer, Iris Ayton, and he hired her on May 8th, 2021, following his arrest. By any measure, 13 interviews is a lot. And Barry didn't just waffle along with the cops. These were official interviews. They were audio and video recorded. And how do you think Barry does interview to interview and across all 13? Well, in this one, I think he definitely gets a cross mark against his name. But before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So we're dealing with the second half of the 9th interview. All of the interviews with the FBI are quite long. They're kind of two-parters. And this one deals with is on page 63 and 64 of the affidavit. So let's go through that. Special Agent Grussing reminded Barry that it was a Wednesday. Remember the previous analysis was about timeline, where Barry acknowledged that he got the timeline wrong on Saturday. Anyway, he reminded Barry that it was Wednesday when Suzanne had said she was done. Barry said, okay, then that was Wednesday, not Friday. She would go through these times where we would fight like that, and then everything would be back to normal. And it was like nothing ever happened. And we'd go eat dinner. We'd go have home. We'd have sex. Everything would be fine. Special Agent Grussing told Barry that investigators have a fuller picture of his actions in Broomfield. Now you can imagine, for Barry, that must sound quite ominous, right? Barry said, I told to Joe and Derek everything. Just think about how garbled that is. I told to Joe and Derek everything. Doesn't that sound like Barry is sort of scrambling a little? And Joe's like, well, why are you going to 5 different trash cans and throwing all kinds of crap away? And I said, I've done that my whole entire life. My truck is a mess. I throw things away here and there because I'm a tightwad and I don't want to pay for trash pickup or this or that. Or I had time that day. I was going to have more time, spend more time on that wall that day. But when I got to it and realized that my workers were going to come and I could just have them do this stuff, and I had time on my hands. Now, again, that's quite a garbled statement. I'm not quite sure what he's saying. Did he have time on his hands? Is that why he got up early? Did he get up early? Like before dawn, to go to, I think he got up at 4:30 in the morning. Did he get up that early in order to have time on his hands? Because all along his workers were only supposed to be there that night. The other thing, if you think about it, is Barry's story is not really going to work if he stays at home long enough for Suzanne to wake up. I'm saying if Suzanne is no longer alive, Barry's story is not going to really work if he says Suzanne is alive and she takes a shower and she, does some of the things that someone would do as part of their normal morning ritual. Perhaps brush their teeth, perhaps have breakfast, perhaps put on certain clothes. No, because all of that's going to have to be manufactured, and of course she's not doing any of those things, right? So in a way, if Suzanne isn't alive, Barry can't really spend like he can't have a late start in the morning, because then he's going to be with a potentially with a fictional phantasm, and he's got to now say what she was doing, and now is there going to be any evidence of her doing that? Does that make sense? Anyway, he goes on to say, Special Agent Grissing asked Barry about coming home on Saturday after errands and whether he remembered where Suzanne was when he got home. Quite a targeted question. Barry said no. Quite a simple question. Do you remember where Suzanne was when you got home? No. Just no. No, without any kind of explanation. Special Agent Grissing asked if she could have been out on the deck. That's quite an interesting response, that Grissing seems to know where Suzanne was, whereas Barry doesn't seem to know. You kind of get a feeling that the FBI are kind of closing in on something, don't you? Barry said, I don't remember, shaking his head side to side before answering. I do not recall where she was when I got home. I don't even remember going to town and doing that. Now, do you remember not that long ago, Barry was Mr. I know exactly where I was, and my telematics will confirm all of that. And I can't seem to remember anything. Special Agent Grissing told Barry that investigators have some images to show him. Barry said of that she sent to this guy. Again, it's kind of a garbled statement. Now, just a couple of additional criticisms. Barry owns $1 million house, and he hired the best lawyer, arguably the best lawyer money could buy in Colorado. Where do you think the money came from for that, incidentally? But in any event, Barry owns $1 million house. He hires the best lawyer money can buy. And so the question is he really such a tightwad? And I think you can see that the FBI's questions here are clearly a lot more targeted. They're narrowing down on the things that they really want to know, the critical questions. They want to know precisely where Suzanne was when Barry returned home. And surprise, surprise, as I say, Mr. I know exactly where I was, now suddenly can't recall. Then the agents show Barry Suzanne's final proof of life, which bizarrely is similar to Paul Murdoch's random recording at the dog kennels. It just happens to be a kind of a random snapshot that seems to kind of mess up the whole timeline in a sense. Remember, that was a recording that sank Paul Murdoch's father's carefully laid plans and alibi. Anyway, Special Agent Grissing confirmed and said that it might be the last time outside of Barry that she's seen by someone else alive. Barry said, I'm telling you right now, there was nothing out of the normal Saturday afternoon. Nothing. It's almost like that evening, nothing ever happened to us that week. She's like one person one day, another person the other day. Now, do you remember Suzanne herself describing Barry as it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde again? In other words, he's describing her in the same terms as she was describing him. He goes on to say, and when she acts like that, I'm going to accept it and take it all in, because when she's distant and cold, I don't get any affection. Now, the other thing is, do you think that Barry is a kind of a passive person, that he would sort of allow Suzanne to call the shots, set the pace, decide what's going to happen in the relationship? Or do you think it was the opposite, that it was Suzanne who was the more passive one and the one who took a step back in order to keep the peace, right? Do you think, which one do you think makes more sense? He says, and Saturday there was no problems, none. And I don't understand that you're telling me she's communicating with this guy Saturday all day. I'm working till noon, come home, eat lunch with her, leave again, and come home and then spend the evening with her, eat supper with her, have sex with her. I can assure you that Saturday night was a good night for us. And I can assure you that we made love that night. And there's no way that she would have done that to me if she's got this head on about this other guy. Now, what's quite interesting with what he says here, he comes home, eats lunch with her, and then he says, leaves again and come home. That's the part that I think is quite interesting, because he'd said previously that they went hiking at Fuses, that they went walking in the neighborhood towards Fuses, and here he simply says, leave again and come home. Where did he leave to? Where was Barry on Saturday afternoon? I think that is the critical question surrounding this case. Where was Barry, let's say from 3 p.m. onwards on Saturday afternoon? Anyway, he says, there's no way that she would have done that to me if she's got this. Okay. Special Agent Grissing said that Suzanne was disclosing things about her love life to the other guy. So, again, the agent reminds Barry that Suzanne's actually telling her paramour a different story compared to the story Barry's telling them. And so Barry's response is, well, I'm sure if she's not disclosing things, our having sex with her lover, Barry made air quotes with his hand while saying this, with regard to her lover, because that would upset him. So she's probably lying to him if she's saying we're not having sex, because we do, and we did. And I can assure you that that night we did, 100%. And February, when I went to meet her in Florida, that's all it was sex. I mean, why would she do that to me if she's got this other guy that she's leaving me for? None of this is making sense. Special Agent Grissing asked what does not make sense to Barry, adding that Barry said earlier things were making sense. Again, quite astute of the agent to see how he's being inconsistent. Anyway, we are now going to page 64. Barry said, making sense in God's eyes. He's saying it makes sense in God's eyes, but it doesn't make sense in my eyes. Why someone like me, someone like us? Well, now that the other thing that's interesting with Barry is his wife said that he would often use God, he would use religion to deal with certain arguments, to deal with certain things that she was accusing him of. He would kind of borrow strength from religion to kind of get his way. And you get a sense that he does it with law enforcement as well, don't you? Anyway, he says, none of this, I'm telling you that there's nothing that I knew about. I know I had texts where I said, yeah, you're having an affair, you're having a boyfriend. I just did that to reciprocate what she was saying to me. Special Agent Grissing said that Suzanne had on her notes on her phone that Barry accused her of having a boyfriend on May 6th, which is the same day she texted and said that they should just do this civilly. Special Agent Grissing asked Barry if he remembered that. Barry said, yeah, I remember that, but I didn't mean it. I was just saying it to try to get to her. Barry talked about striking Suzanne once when he clipped her nose, but that was the only time he was physically abusive. Special Agent Grissing said that in doing the victimology work on Suzanne, investigators know that that was not the only time she came at Barry, and that when Suzanne got frustrated, she would physically come at Barry. Barry said, she physically come at me several times through my life, and I took it. And I'm a man, and I'm tough, and I can take it. And this is where, in this, him putting himself in this passive role, his lips perhaps are too loose, because the next thing he says is, gotta lie about the scratch marks. So in this verbiage, in this sort of little narrative where he's describing Suzanne actually confronting him, actually, in some kind of physical contest with him, right, coming at him. He talks about getting scratch marks, and that he's got to lie about getting scratch marks. And so the question is, if she'd often scratched him in the past, isn't that exactly what happened in the incident where Suzanne lost her life? Was that whoever attacked her, she scratched. Anyway, he goes on to say, in front of people when they're on my face, but this is the only time I ever touched her, and I swear to God, I would never lay a hand on my wife, and that was just a crazy reflex. Now, as I said before, we know that fresh scratch marks, not old wounds, not old scabs, but fresh scratch marks were found on Barry's arms and hands. If what he's saying here is true, then it could have been, it could be that there was more than one instance where Suzanne scratched him. Do you think that is a major concession? Because, here Barry, in his own words, is saying that his wife has scratched him. And the question is, what were those wounds on his hands and arms at around the time Suzanne disappeared, right? What were those wounds and how did he get them? Now, what's also interesting to observe is that here Barry's putting everything in God's name. It's all part of God's plan, which sounds like a fait accompli, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound like he believes Suzanne is dead? Of course, when Barry's lawyer comes into the mix, Barry suddenly believes Suzanne is alive again and is simply out there somewhere. Anyway, we're almost at the end of our analysis. Bottom of page 64. Special Agent Harris asked Barry what he meant when he said, this might be God's way of resolving things. Barry said, I tell you what, I've had a very hard time understanding why God did this. Now, again, what do you think he's talking about when he says God did this? Do you think it means that God asked her to run away and live somewhere else and decide to come back on her own? Or God decided, what she did is unacceptable, and in my wisdom, I'm going to make sure that she isn't alive anymore. That there's going to be some kind of permanent solution to this problem. Anyway, he goes on to say, and he allowed it. If you know what you know that he allows bad things to happen. When he's talking about bad things happening to Suzanne, you think her just leaving on her own is that? He goes on to say, but all that we've been through, and all that we are, I couldn't understand it. Maybe we'll never understand till we get to heaven. Doesn't that mean we'll see Suzanne in heaven because she's not alive again? Anyway, but if I would have known this in the beginning, I wouldn't have had to suffer for 9 months not knowing why God did what he did. I'm not saying he did it to punish Suzanne because of her affair. Well, isn't that what he is thinking, what he is saying? But it makes more sense than what I knew before you guys came today. Barry said he wanted the news of the affair to be kept between agents and him, adding, and if we can keep all this private between us forever, that's all I would ever want. Now, why do you think he would want to do that? Isn't it because he suspects if the public find out about it, that the public are going to reach a particular conclusion? And what do you think that conclusion is? And how do you think that conclusion might reflect on Barry? Do you think it would reflect well on him? Anyway, there's a final reference on bottom of page 64, number 58. It says, reference the scratches on Barry's left arm on May 13th in CCSO photos. Barry later to the FBI said he did not recall how he got those, possibly from a tree. So anyway, the FBI approached Barry for their first interview, right, on January 27th. This was his 9th interview. Well, guess when they return with more questions? Well, the very next day. And we'll deal with that interview, his 10th, in part 8 of our deep diving analysis. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.